Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Pathways to Excellence. Today, I have the distinct honor of welcoming one of the most distinguished individuals in the history of Malaysian history, Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, the 4th and 7th Prime Minister of Malaysia. Tun, it's an absolute honor to have you on this podcast, and thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Tun, it's fascinating because I was just watching the podcast that you did with Mr. Khairi Jamaluddin, and it was about 10 months ago, if you recall, Tun. And during that time, Mr. Khairi asked you a question that goes as follows. What is it like to be 98, Tun? And so my question now for you is, Tun, 1 year has passed, and now you are 99. How do you feel?
Well, it is frightening in a way, because it means that I am very near the end. Because at 99, you cannot live for much longer. But it is also something that I'm grateful for, because at 99, normally you also lose your capacities. Capacity to work, to do things, to talk. Normally that is what happens. But I have been able to maintain my functions. That is to say, I can move around, I can walk, not too far, and I can speak and remember things and behave normally. So that is, to me, something to be grateful for.
Tun, the focus of today's podcast is on a topic that you have been deeply concerned with throughout the entire course of your life, and I look forward to drawing on your years of experience along the way. To start off, Tun, I'd like to maybe draw upon a little bit of your early years. As I know, Tun, you were born on July the 10th in 1925. Your father, as I recall, was the teacher, in fact, of Tunku Abdul Rahman, our father of independence. What was it like for you to grow up in that household, Tun?
As a teacher, he has this attitude of being very strict, because as a teacher, of course, he was quite strict in the class. He insists on the students studying hard. So at home, he was the same. He insists that we all study very hard.
I see.
To the point where when he comes home and we hear him arriving home, we hear his cough, we all run to our books to read the books and to do our homework.
Wow.
So, son of a teacher is always a kind of student.
Wow. Fascinating. Okay. Did you take naturally to that sort of studying, sir, or was it something that had to kind of be pushed into you?
Well, I read a lot of English storybooks, and I was fascinated by the stories of heroes who are very brave, very disciplined, and all that. And that influenced my thinking. I too would like to be like the heroes in the British novels. So that affects my perception of things.
Do you remember any stories that were some of your favorites, Tun? From the stories of the Malay world, one might think of the story of, let's say, Hang Tuah, Hang Jebat.
Well, most of the stories I read were English novels. Later on only I got hold of Hikayat Hang Tuah. So I make a comparison between British heroes and Malay heroes. They are different. And the story also is quite different. The story about the English heroes shows that they are very brave people, very disciplined, willing to take risks and always succeeding. Whereas with Hikayat Hang Tuah, it's about how he invariably wins every fight that he got into. All over. including he went to Turkey, and there also he had a contest with some Turks, and he was successful. Even against the Japanese, when he contested, he was successful. But the story is not too convincing, that this was the real story. Whereas the British novels, of course, is fiction, but the story is very well written, and you begin to admire the hero, and you feel like you would also like to be like the heroes in the British novel.
Fascinating. Thank you for that, Tun. Throughout a long and storied career, Tun, in many ways, people would say that you have charted your own story. It was because of you, Tun, that Malaysia managed to gain the self-confidence to stand upon the world stage. And so, when we think about this legacy, Tun, I think a lot about education and the way that, it is shaping the youth of our nation. Tun, will you share with me, what was your fascination with education, and what eventually led you to take the decisions that you took as you were education minister and eventually as the prime minister of this nation?
Well, I read a lot of novels, and although I admire the heroes in the novel, I felt that we can do the same, that they are not in any way superior to us. Then if we do the right things, we can achieve the same success that the heroes in this novel achieve. So I believe that Malaysians can do what the fiction says about their heroes. So I was convinced that given the right incentive or guidance, we also should be able to achieve the development that you see in many Western countries.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tun. Throughout your memoirs, I remember reading through, you spoke about how you wanted to fight for the pride of our country. You spoke about the colonialism by Japan, by Thailand, and the British as well. And you spoke a lot about bringing really Malaysia to a point where it could be proud of itself. So what is it that made you feel that this was important, and what eventually drove you to take action? Because Tun, there's a big difference between somebody thinking about doing something, or hari ni saya nak makan McDonald's, or like hari ni saya nak buatkan business yang baru, but not everybody will do it, Tun. So what is it that drove you to act at the time?
Yeah, as I said just now, I want Malaysia to be as developed as the developed countries of the world. And when I read about them, I feel that we can also achieve the same thing. But there were certain factors which has got in the way of our development. For example, in Malaysia, we have very small states. We don't have a big country. We have a very small state. In the peninsula, there were 9 Malay states, all tiny ones and all very weak, and all have to submit to other nations. They have to submit to Siam, to China, and later on, of course, to the British. So why are they so weak that they have to submit to other powers? The reason is they were not united as one country. They were divided into too many states. English word, the proper word would be fierce. They were not really countries. They were just small states, and they managed to survive by showing that they are prepared to be vassals of great powers. In those days, of course, Siam was a big nation, China was a big nation, so the Malay states accept that they were the vassal of Thailand, of Siam, and China, and later on of the British.
Right. So, what is it again? Bersatu, teguh, bercerai, roboh.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tun. Tun, you transitioned from being a student at the English school over to becoming a medical student. I understand that you received a scholarship to study medicine when in reality you had wanted to study law. So that would have been the conventional track taken really by a lot of people aspiring to careers in politics. The late Tunku Abdul Rahman and Tun Razak were lawyers, if I recall, in London. And so was your, well, I don't want to say friend, but I will say individual with whom you had a civil relationship, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. When you think about that journey, sir, in an alternate timeline where you had studied law instead of medicine, how do you feel that your life and career might have turned out?
Well, I went into politics when I was still in school. So by the time I finished my secondary schooling, I hope to be able to get a scholarship to study law, because from my readings, most leaders were lawyers, because lawyers are able to argue and present their case in a convincing way. So I wanted to be a lawyer, but in those days it's difficult to get scholarship, and they gave me a scholarship to study medicine. I went to study medicine, but I found that medicine was quite interesting, and many of the things that we do in medicine can be applied to other activities in life, to the administration of a country, to management of a lot of things. Is based on the approach, the system that we use in medicine to identify disease and to treat disease.
Tun, you gave up medical practice when you became a cabinet minister, but do you feel that there are specific parts of your career where your medical training served you in identifying and fixing the problems of the nation?
I have always pointed out that I became a politician first. In school, I was already involved in politics. And the reason why I wanted to have a university level education is because as a schoolboy, people don't take me seriously. Whenever I explain things, they don't take me seriously. So I thought, if I have a university degree, then people will look up to me and they will accept my argument. That is why I wanted to study law, but okay, I had to study medicine, and that gives me status. So when I talk to people, it is a doctor talking. But that is why I wanted a university degree. And I then found that my studies and my medical knowledge of the systems in medicine was useful even for politics. You see, I approach problems in politics the way I approach people with sickness. People may come to me to complain, maybe they have fever, then I have to do certain things to diagnose the ailment and then to treat. It's the same in administration, in politics. You are faced with a problem. How do you tackle the problem? I do the same thing as I do with medicine. I have to find out the background, the history, do the study, administration, do due diligence and all that, until I find what is the problem. And once you know the problem, there are ways of tackling the problem.
Wonderful, thank you for that. Tun, there was a time when you were an outcast from UMNO, and that is where you wrote this book right here, which is The Heritage of My Late Father. Thank you so much for having written this book. I realize it's a somewhat maybe unconventional thing for a Chinese boy to be casually reading along the way, but it really shed a lot of light into my understanding of the world at that time. But after you came back into the fold of UMNO under Tun Razak, you were then appointed to become Education Minister. You spoke of being a doctor earlier, Tun, and about diagnosing the problems, fixing the problems along the way. So when you were Education Minister, Tun, in that period from 1974 to 78, right there, what kinds of problems did you see were there in the nation, and how did you endeavor to fix them?
I regard education the same way as I regard a problem in disease. For example, if a person is sick, you know the kind of treatment that you should give. When a person is uneducated, is without knowledge, education gives them the knowledge. And with the knowledge, they become a better person, more capable of solving problems. That is my approach to education. So I would like to see all Malaysians be very well educated, so that when they are faced with any problem, they can solve the problem and so contribute towards their own success and also the success of the nation. So education is very important. It is a cure for a lot of ailments.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Tun. So Tun, if possible, I'd like to go also into this question of the Malay dilemma as well. When we think of the Malay dilemma, so we think, or at least those of us who have read the book may think about the frustrations that you were writing about during that time right there. A time after colonialism had set the Malays in a poor economic position with no economic base of their own, while at the same time there were immigrants that were coming in along the way right there. Now, when we think really about this Malay dilemma, Tun, and the means of resolving it right there, a big part of that was, for example, quotas and providing opportunities right there. Now, in the recent podcast that you did with Mr. Khairi, Tun, you observed that the Malay dilemma had not yet been resolved right here. But to go back to the start of our interview, 1 year has passed ever since that last interview right there. Did we move any closer during that 1 year, Tun, towards resolving the Malay dilemma? Or have we perhaps gone backwards, or has it stayed the same?
It's not so easy as doing it, solving the dilemma within 1 year. Because I studied unofficially, not properly, I understood sociology. And I believe that people succeed or fail based on their culture. Mm-hmm. The culture that is important is the value system. If the value system is right, then you succeed. If the value system is wrong, then you fail. It doesn't matter whether you are white or yellow or brown, it doesn't matter. But it is a culture. And I find that the Malay culture does not contribute towards their success. There are many things they practice, they believe in, which are obstructions to their success. On the other hand, the Chinese culture is older, it's more than 4,000 years old, and it is a culture that is always faced with problems. In China, they have a very frequent shortage of food, lots of people, shortage of food, people die, and they have to face problem. And their culture enabled them to solve many of the problems. So between the Malays and the Chinese, the culture is different. And my idea is that if we can change the culture of the Malays, the value system of the Malays, they will achieve as well as the Chinese or the Europeans. So that is why I wrote about the Malay dilemma. The dilemma is when they try to correct their culture, they would seem to be doing something that the others may not appreciate. Because to help them, we apparently seem not to be helping the Chinese. So that is the dilemma. Do you go ahead with the task of changing the Malay culture at the expense of antagonism by the Chinese, or do you just forget about it? You forget about it, then the disparity between Malays and Chinese will always be there. And when you have rich people, poor people, there is always antagonism, and the country cannot grow well, cannot be stable.
Thank you, Tun. I'd like to talk about another kind of what I see almost as a dilemma, or, for example, a sort of like cultural barrier that I kind of see. But please correct me if I'm wrong as well. When you speak about the culture of the Malays, so like you have spoken about how maybe they are satisfied with what it is that they want. They don't necessarily strive for more. Maybe these people aren't doing as much as they possibly could with the resources that they have to achieve the best possible result that this world could permit. But at the same time, Tun, isn't it true in a way that satisfaction and the ability to be happy with what one has is a virtue in itself, Tun?
It is a virtue if you are not competing. But in Malaysia, you have to compete because we have 3 different races in Malaysia. It is bad to have one race with a culture that elevates them, that carries them forward, and one race that is static. So they are very happy. Before the coming of the Chinese, it was all right because they were satisfied, they were happy with them. But when the Chinese came, a very good example, the Malays used to build houses, wooden houses with a tap roof. And then the Chinese came. The Chinese were much more clever in building houses. And this I observed in my own house. You know, before my father asked a Malay contractor to extend the house. But when the Chinese contractor came, they do things much faster, much better, more solid construction. So the Malay cannot compete with the Chinese. So because of that, the Malay withdraw, and after some time, there are no Malay house builders, only Chinese house builders. In fact, during the British time, anything mechanical, the Malays say we can't do. It must be ask the Chinese to do. Chinese contractors, Chinese mechanics, Chinese, everything is Chinese. And they withdraw. So when they withdraw, they don't have the skills, they don't develop the skills to compete with the Chinese. So the disparity keeps on getting worse and worse.
Thank you for that, Tun. When I understood the Malay dilemma at the outset, I always understood it as, do we blur the economic picture, or do we allow essentially the country to move forward as fast as possible, push forward into the future? But what I'm sensing from your words, Tun, is a sort of secondary dilemma. I spoke earlier about a certain culture, right? Like the culture essentially of being satisfied with what it is that one wants in this world. In a sense, perhaps we can say that that is a good thing. But in a sense, isn't there then a secondary dilemma, Tun, whereby people are being forced essentially to abandon that way of life, which is good in itself, towards competing within the world?
Well, when you try to correct, it will seem to be that you are correcting the Malay situation at the expense of the Chinese. So you have to give special treatment to the Malays, like giving them more contracts and giving them more scholarships, etc. And when you do that, you cause the Chinese to say that this is not fair. Our people are also poor, we should get it. But if you correct the Malays and the Chinese based merely on their poverty, the chances are the Chinese will do well. The Malays will still not do so well. So the dilemma is, do you accept that there will be some resentment on the part of the Chinese when we attempt to correct the Malay problem, or do you just leave it at that?
I'd like to draw on a passage within your memoirs for a quick bit. This is an incredible book, by the way. You should pick it up. You spoke on page 233 the following words. In my book, I blame the social environment and the government for Malay underperformance in the modern economy. Now, from fresh observations, I am convinced that much of the problem lies with the Malays themselves. Unfortunately, too many of them still refer to my original analysis, and this is a reminder that this book right here was a product of the 1970s, and related solutions to overcome their disabling dilemma. And here, this is the last part I'll read. Worse still, most Malays have come to think that the affirmative action instituted by the government in the NEP is a recognition of their superior position as the indigenous people of this country. They claim that because they are the Tuan, or Lords of Malaysia, this discrimination in their favour must be permanent. This is the new Malay dilemma. Do we take the bull by the horns and tell Malays the truth, or do we refrain for fear of losing their political support? When you think about those words, Tun, do you feel that you have come closer towards resolving this new Malay dilemma, Tun?
Yeah, there is some success in correcting the problems of the Malays, but not enough to catch up with the Chinese. We don't expect to achieve what the Chinese achieve, but the disparity should not be very big. It should be very close by. And the dilemma is that the disparity is still there, and we need to continue to help the Malays catch up. Like, for example, Malay families are poor. They cannot send their children to the university. So we have to give scholarships to them, more scholarship, even if their results are not as good as the Chinese boys, but we have to give them more scholarship. That was my experience. When I went to study medicine in Singapore, I was the best Malay student, but I was far behind the Chinese and the Indian student. And out of 70 students, only 7 students were Malays. You can't catch up like that. You have to have almost the same number. Many Chinese were rich enough to send their own children to the university, but practically no Malay can send their own children to the university. So the government must come in and help. But when the government comes in and helps the Malays, especially those who seem to have a lesser result, not so good result in the examination, then the Chinese feel that you are not being fair. We have our problem. Yes, you have your problem, but if you tackle this on the same basis, especially on merit, I think the Malays will never catch up. So we have to discriminate in favor of the Malays. This is the dilemma. You do that, then you create tension between races. If you don't do that, the problem will get bigger.
Thank you for that, Tun. But nonetheless, I am living proof that the government discrimination was not total in some sense. So Tun, when you think about the value system that you think could be good for then the Malays to essentially learn about right there. So like the influences that you wrote about right there, you talk about how when you went to Japan, you saw the trains, you saw how they were running so efficiently, and from there you talk about that perfectionism that you had seen. And in fact, even before we started this session, you very kindly showed me some of the items in your office as well, talking about that perfectionism right there. A question now comes to mind, Dun. Since you enjoy Japanese culture, do you watch anime? Do you watch anime? Like Japanese animation?
Japanese?
Oh, okay, never mind. Anime. Like, like moving cartoons,
Yeah.
Do you?
Manga.
Do you? do you read any of those?
I see that, but I couldn't follow because it's all in Japanese.
Okay.
I observe the Japanese.
I see.
The way they behave. They lost the war. Japan was destroyed by the Americans bombing and all that. But they did not bother about being enemies of America. They were concerned about their own country, how to rebuild after the damage caused by the war. And they were working very hard. And they were actually catching up with the West, and they became the second biggest economy in the world, next only to America. So there is something about their culture which pushes them to try and catch up and do things correctly, achieve good products and all that. So if the Malays can copy the Japanese, I think we can achieve much better result than currently.
Dun, I'd like to draw in on that point for a bit. You spoke a little bit about copying from the Japanese in your KS interview. So when asked about, what distinguishes the elite Malays from the rest of the general population, you mentioned that they tend to adapt some of the good things that they can see out there. And that has been a constant thing throughout your entire career, Dun. In fact, even Mr. Lee Kuan Yew in Third World to First praised you for that exact trait. He mentioned that you were different from your predecessors. He said that you were learning constantly, and you were essentially the first prime minister to really sit down with him and then to really learn, despite your prior disagreements in parliament along the way. My question then, Dun, is even though you speak about the Malays learning, essentially, or Malaysia as a whole learning from the societies around them, do you not think that maybe there are some good things maybe about the Malays that the world should learn from as well?
Well, I try to think that the Malays are not a violent people. They are willing to suffer and not react. In other countries, if you have such a difference, there will be violence, there will be clashes, riots and things like that. The Malays, they suffer, but they accept. Almost, they would say that this is God-given. You can't help it. That is their attitude. That is why, although there is this distinct disparity between Malays and Chinese in Malaysia, and completely different culture, different language, different everything, but in Malaysia, there is no clash. But in other countries, when you have that kind of thing, even very simple difference. For example, in some countries, they are all Muslim, but Muslim of different sect. One is Sunni, one is Shia. They fight and kill each other. And people demonstrate in the streets, they get... But in Malaysia, it is very calm. It's very stable. So that is the Malay character, that they are willing to suffer. They are unhappy, but they are prepared to suffer. But because they are quite contented with themselves, they don't make any effort. They don't make the right effort to catch up. And when they don't catch up, the disparity becomes bigger. And if it becomes bigger, eventually they will be suffering, and I don't know how much they can accept being the poor people in a rich country. Some of them might become violent. So for me, to avoid violence, you have to cure the disease, and the disease is the disparity between Malays and Chinese, between rich and poor. You have to correct that. You cannot change the Chinese into Malay or the Malays into Chinese, but you can correct the economic performance.
Thank you for that. Tun, in your memoirs, you spoke about one method of doing just that, the introduction to Malaysia of science and math in English, and that is essentially the PPSMI policy. I grew up under that policy, Tun. I studied science and math in English, and being able to expose myself to that world right there made the transition very easy as well. So a personal thank you to you for that. Science and math in English, this is a policy that has been overturned by successive administrations. We can see that now there is a DLP, Education Minister YB Fadilin that has said that now there needs to be a mandatory Malay DLP class along the way right here. When you think about this sort of relationship between those languages right there, English and Malay right here, do you have any sort of thoughts about how perhaps this language relationship should evolve, I guess, for the future or the sake of the Malaysia that you have served for all this while?
I mean, there is a difference between learning science and math and learning geography and history and other subjects. Geography and history, the facts doesn't change. It's always the same. This is a country, you know the capital, you know the size of the country, that doesn't change. History also doesn't change. In this year there was a war and all that, somebody won, that doesn't change. But science is different. Science changes. The science of 30 years ago cannot deal with the problems of present day. In those days we don't have IT, we don't have AI and all that. But today this is very common. So science, all the time new knowledge is added. And new knowledge comes to us not in Malay, it comes to us in English. So if you want to catch up with the latest, if you want to wait for the latest knowledge to be translated into Malay before you learn, then you will be left behind. Because to translate the new technology, for example, takes time. It requires a person who is knowledgeable about science, who is fluent in Malay and fluent in English. So they can read in English and translate into Malay. But how many people will want to do that? But if you learn it in English, immediately you can access the new knowledge. Because all the time there will be new knowledge. Up to this point, so many things, new things are being added all the time. How do you apply AI? You see, so if you are always learning in Malay, to wait for the new findings to be translated into Malay takes time. But if you learn it in English, you have immediate access to the new knowledge. That is why I said that science and math, because we talk now about algorithm, science and math should be learned in English. But geography, history, Malay language, all should be done in Malay. So we have two languages. Every student in Malaysia speaks Malay well, but also understand English well. So we would be not only fluent in Malay, but also we are up to date in our knowledge of science. That is why I propose that we should learn science and math in English, but geography and history, you do it in Malay, and you will learn Bahasa Malaysia. So that is sufficient. You cannot use science in order to learn Malay. Science is for learning new discoveries.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tun. On that note, I'd like to shift the discussion over from learning those specific things, the particular question of, English or Malay, over to, some of the implications really of this new technology that is shaping our lives right here. Tun, when we think about our modern day AI algorithms, they shape the way that we see the world. Algorithms on a day-to-day basis filter through hundreds upon thousands of posts to determine algorithmically what is the thing that is going to provide the most retention time for the platform so that they can take part in capitalism that ultimately serves the interests of the corporate entities that run these organizations right there. And along the way, we see the implications, misinformation, disinformation from entities around the world manipulating elections, changing the way that we see certain things along the way. And so when we think about that, Tun, how do we navigate this, and how do we as Malaysia come to terms with it?
For me, everything that we have two different uses. One is good, one is bad. Take a knife, for example. You can use a knife to carve beautiful things, but you can also use the knife to kill a person. It depends upon you, how you use. The new information technology, the new science that we are learning can be used for bad things as well as good things. It is up to you whether you use for good things, you use it for your acquiring knowledge. I think it is up to you. It's up to you. It is not technology that is wrong. It is you who just make use of good technology for bad things. You can use that technology for good things. For example, now you can access any knowledge without going to a library to look for the books, to search for the knowledge. Nowadays, you just put in the subject and you get the answers immediately. This enables you to access knowledge very quickly. So you can become better educated because of the new system. But if you go for pornography or stealing or cheating and all that, that is your choice. It is like the knife, as I said just now. Use a knife to carve beautiful things or use a knife to kill a person. It's your choice.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tun. And as we move towards the close of this interview, Tun, I want to draw upon that analogy of the knife that you mentioned earlier. A knife can be used to kill a person, or it can be used to carve beautiful things. I think that that's a very apt idea right here. When we think about humans in the modern age, they have access to an unprecedented freedom in some sense, to be able to say whatever it is that they want, to seek out certain things along the way. But if we think about it along the way, so this privilege can also be misused. And I want to draw back to a time when you were education minister and you said essentially, we have to keep the students studying. It was upon that basis that you decided to amend the UUCA along the way. Do you still feel that that logic still applies in this modern age of information technology? And do you feel that, in fact, Malaysians should have more freedom of speech?
Well, you know, when you go to study in a university, in a way, your study is paid for by other people. Even if you pay the fees, the university, the teachers and all that, the cost of teaching you is borne by the government. Or if you get a scholarship, the people who give you the scholarship, they give you a scholarship to do what? To study. But when you go to the university, you don't study, but you go into politics. That means you are abusing the privilege given to you. When you are in the university, you should focus on learning, acquiring knowledge in the university. When you finish your university education, you get a job, you work to earn money. At that time, it's your money. But when you are given a scholarship, and most Malay students are in the university because they were given scholarship. The scholarship is given for them to acquire knowledge in the university. But if they spend their time demonstrating, this is what happened when I had to go into Auku. The thing is that the students who were demonstrating at that time, I was just made Minister of Education. I was with Tun Razak and Razali Shafi. We had this demonstration by the students, and they were all Malay students, not Chinese students, not Indian students, Malay students. And the Malay students were on scholarships. So the money given to them is for studying, but they are spending that money demonstrating against the government. We expect to have the people criticize the government, but you criticize at your own cost. But you are using somebody's money to do something that those people who gave you the money did not want you to do that. They want you to study. After you study, you work, you earn an income, you want to spend your money by demonstration, that's your business.
Mm-hmm.
So Auku was amended to make sure that people who are studying in the university focus on studying. Later on, when they come out, they want to demonstrate, even if they want to have a war against the government, that is their right, because they are spending their own money.
I see. There's a question I'm not sure I should ask, but I will ask it anyway. Tun, we see that in the last year, there have been lots of protests on Palestine. We saw in Columbia University lots of scenes featuring students going out and essentially protesting really against their administrations. They were essentially fighting against, well, what they perceive really as support essentially of Zionist regimes and so on and so forth. When you think of that type of situation and that type of protest, Tun, do you view it differently from what we saw essentially with the UUCA?
Yeah, these people feel very badly because of the Israelis who were killing Palestinians. And their government did not try to put a stop to it. So they want their government to put a stop to this massacre, this genocide. So they can talk, they can say anything, but the government doesn't care. So they had to demonstrate. Of course, when they demonstrate, many of them are private students, they don't get scholarships, and some of them may get scholarship, but they feel very strongly that there is an injustice being perpetrated by the Israelis against Palestinians. And at that time, the Palestinians, 20,000 Palestinians have already been killed. Now it is 41,000. I mean, if the US is keen to promote human rights, then the Israelis are denying the rights of the Palestinians. Their government should put a stop to that, but the government did not. So the students demonstrate because they feel very strongly about this. It's not something about themselves, but it's about justice.
A greater cause.
Yeah.
Understood.
But in Malaysia, we don't demonstrate.
I see. Thank you so much, Tun. Tun, currently you are 99 years old. At the start of this conversation, when I entered the room, you spoke about how it can seem scary to think about, well, the remainder of time. Yet, Tun, you surprise us time and time again with riding at 150 kilometers per hour and like going at a rate that a lot of people would never imagine you to be able to do at like 99 years old. And so truly it's interesting to think about the possibility that I might even reach that age at some point. But Tun, my question, if you were given the chance to live forever, would you take that opportunity?
Well, I know that my time is limited. In fact, when I was 70 years old, 70 plus years old, I gave myself a life of up to 75. So yeah, at that time.
Wow.
So I decided that the time has come for me to resign, because I thought that I cannot be a prime minister at the age of 80, you know. So I decided to resign at that time. So I thought that I would never survive for so long. But after I resigned, I find that I could still function. I could still be active and also take an interest in what is happening in the country. On the top of that, many people came to see me and they asked me, please do something. Especially when Najib was stealing money and all that, they came to see me and said, please do something. I said, I have retired. But they said, please, you can do something. So in the end, I resigned from UMNO and I started a new party. I didn't expect to live for long, but at least at that time I was still able. So although I was already 80 at that time, I started a new party because people asked me to do something, and I think I know how to do something. So I set up a party, worked with the opposition, and in the 14th election, contested and defeated Najib. First time in the history of Malaysia that the BN, previously the Alliance, lost in an election. I think my contribution to the opposition was to get some Malays who were supportive of me to also vote for the opposition. So the opposition won, and for the first time, BN lost.
Thank you, Tun. And so my last question to you for today is, as you look forward into the future, Tun, how do you hope that Malaysia will make a name for itself on the world stage? Maybe 10, 20, 30 years from now. You've expressed maybe concerns that perhaps Malaysia at some point could become like Singapore. There could be some other alternate realities that might come about as well. But in your personal wish and your personal aspiration, what do you hope for Malaysia to become in the future?
Well, presently what happens is that each race wants to maintain its own identity. But even then, Malaysia was able to develop. Yes, during my time when I was first time Prime Minister, the same problem was there. The Chinese were supportive of the Chinese, the Malays supportive of the Malays, but we worked together. The government had Chinese representation, Indian representation, Malay representation, and relatively speaking, the country was stable and was developing very well. You see, that situation can continue. But unfortunately, when I stepped down, the leaders did not follow the policies of my government, but they decided that it is opportunity for them to make money for themselves, to steal money. Both Pala, Abdullah, and more so Najib stole money, did not focus on developing the country. And the country stopped developing and became a kleptocracy, a country run by thieves. You see, so that was bad. So the choice is whether to use the policies that developed Malaysia until it became the Asian tiger, or you want to follow this group which steals money from the people, from the government. So if you go back to the system that enabled Malaysia to develop, into the future, same policy, maybe some modification, I think Malaysia would be able to continue developing and become a developed country. But if you choose to give because of bribery, corruption and all that, you choose people who are not interested in developing Malaysia but interested in stealing money, then of course the future for Malaysia would be very bad. So it's up to the people. When people give you money to vote for them, it is because without the money you won't vote for them because they were bad. If they were good, they don't have to give money. During my time, I didn't have money. I was able to win 2/3 majority every election, and I went through 5 elections. I won without money. But when they use money, it is because they want to do wrong things, and in order to get the support, they give money. And of course, when they give money, they have to find money, they steal money, so you are going to have bad government. If you choose a government based on bribery and corruption. So it is up to the people. You want a good government, you can. You want a bad government, that's your choice.
Ladies and gentlemen, on Pathways, Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. Tun, thank you so much. It's been an absolute honor.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right.